Day 284 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And as always, I'll start off with these Russian military losses, so we take a bit of a look at the exhaustion of the Russian forces. So as of the 4th of December 22, we are currently sitting on 91,150, so an additional 650 up from the previous day. Then we'll move down a bit and look at the hardware losses, so armoured combat vehicles, an additional 6 losses, tanks 5, artillery 2, and 1 aircraft, which I'll get into shortly in a moment there as well. Now we'll jump back to the map, and today we will start out in Ukraine. There's been a lot of fires, and there continues to be a lot of fires in Russia, but I don't want to mention them all every single day. But we'll continue to mention them from a military strategic point of view. Anyway, we'll move across to the Donbass today in Ukraine and start out within the Luhansk Oblast. So partisans in the Luhansk Oblast actually burned down a switchboard on a railroad, which was probably very likely enacted to slow down the advance of Russian army trains or logistics to the front lines. Then also in this north region, in the Luhansk Oblast, Ukraine HIMARSed around 4 or 5 Russian bases in the region between 6 or 7 a.m. this morning. I am looking for some photos though for that one so far. Then we move down a bit further where battles continue to rage in the Crimea area there. Oh, but do note the Ukrainian forces did happen to capture a Russian tank just nearby the forest, just south of Crimea. So right there, so kudos to them. Then right next door to there, the AFU captured at least half of Chervono-Popivka, and fighting is actually still ongoing there around the P66 highway, so this yellow line right here. But as you can probably tell, this map is always a bit slow to update. Oh, and also, Ukraine reportedly has some presence at 2 settlements just north of here. So these 2 locations there. And I'm actually not really surprised about this, as they do have the high ground here. So the Ukrainian armed forces, as you can see, have the high ground in that region as well. Then we'll move it down a bit to the Bakhmut area, where the Ukrainian armed forces have recently sent significant reinforcements to the region. Now, Russian forces will struggle to advance past Bakhmut, even if they were to capture it, which I don't think that they will. And take the north of Bakhmut, for instance. So the Ukrainian lines of defense north of the city are quite extensive, which leading to Russia doing a lot of frontal assaults, which in turn there leads to a lot of Russian cannon fodder. Oh, and also just south of Bakhmut, a Russian Su-34 fighter aircraft was shot down by a Ukrainian handheld shoulder-mounted manpad. So these planes are up to $50 million per unit. And due to economic sanctions, Russia, they're not making any more of these right now. Gee, not to mention the loss of the pilot, which takes years to get combat ready, to train to be combat ready. So episodes like these have to be a real gut punch for the Russian Air Force. And the real reason why Russian jet planes sometimes appear to be, or really any aircraft on the front lines, appear to be dropping like flies is simply due to the highly contested airspace around the region. So for example, both sides have numerous air defenses all set up, ready to go with their radars on, which means this aircraft, or all aircraft in fact, have to fly low, so low, which in turn makes them vulnerable to the manpads, like as was in the case for this one. But if I were to put it a bit more differently, maybe a bit more simple, if these planes were going to fly high in this region, they're almost 100% guaranteed to be picked up by traditional air defense radars and then taken out. Conversely, if they fly lower, their cross-radar section cannot be picked up as easily by these traditional air defense radars. But then they risk the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground taking them out via close proximity manpad hits instead. And let's say it's half as likely. So the aircraft or the pilots will always choose to fly lower to the ground, just because they're not guaranteed to be taken out that way. But the rates are still pretty high. Then we'll move a little bit further south in the Donbass. You might remember Pavlivka and Volodar in the last few weeks. They're still contested regions or locations, settlements at the moment, but things look like they've cooled down a bit so far. So probably literally speaking as well, with night temperatures at this location now reaching 14 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 10 degrees Celsius. But in fact, I've now even seen stories and footage of Russian mobilized soldiers still on Russian soil at their Russian staging grounds, their army barracks, just before they go into the front line. And they actually are dying of hypothermia there instead, again on Russian soil. So the sleeping bags that they've been provided are just not good enough for sleeping outside. And I really knew that we'd see or start to hear a lot of odd stories as the winter progresses. But I'd actually never imagined that Russian soldiers would be dying on their own soil so far away from the front lines. And the reported reason for their deaths there? He fell asleep and didn't wake up. That's actually on some of these official reports. Now, excuses like these are no doubt designed for the Russian army to fudge the statistics in their favor so that newly mobilized Russian conscripts are not dying of hypothermia on Russian land just before they get moved to the front lines of Ukraine. But that's actually a close enough description for hypothermia, because you start to go in this semi-conscious state and you start to fall asleep and you never wake up. Then we'll move across on the map to Zaporizhia, where there's been an explosion in Tokmak, so right here. And, Tokmak continues to be no stranger to high-precision strikes from the Ukrainian army. Russia's still not learning their lesson right here. Then we'll move across to Kherson, where Russian forces continue random shelling of Kherson city, so just above the river there. And as a result, the Ukrainian forces are said to be responding quite powerfully with precision counter-battery fire. So the Ukrainian forces are really looking to take out the frontline positions of the Russian forces just below the river there. And Ukraine will continue to cut the Russian supply lines, making it pretty untenable for the Russian troops in this location on the front line to retain their frontline defensive positions, and that they'll have to be pushed further and further back from the front line. This is just what's happening in the war. They start out on closer to central Ukraine, and then the Russian army starts to get pulled back or pushed back more and more because they just don't have the technology to compete realistically. Then we'll move across to Crimea, where there isn't much to report today per se, but it is starting to become widely accepted more now that the Russian armed forces will only be able to supply the Russian army through ships sent to Crimea from Russia, basically. And this is all due to the Ukrainian army effectively prioritizing Russian land-based logistics hubs and routes in mostly Zaporizhia and in the Donetsk Oblast there as well. In fact, if you look closely, you'll see these white lines. These are the train lines. I mention these every now and then. So these are the very infrastructure lines that Ukraine is striking so that Russia doesn't have any land-based logistics, forcing them to ship goods and everything to Crimea specifically. And really, supplying an army by ship constantly is slow and painfully inefficient. And as the military lore goes, infantry wins battles, but logistics wins wars. Then we'll move across to some news for the day. So have a look here. So inspected fragments of shot down Russian missiles within Ukrainian borders has shown that some of these Russian missiles have been produced as recently as August this year. Most analysts indicate that this very likely points to the fact that Russian missile stocks are starting to deplete much quicker than previously anticipated. So basically, Russia are firing newer and newer missiles straight from the production line. And this really is not a good look. And the situation is said to be getting so bad that it is believed that Russia only has the capacity now to fire 5 or 6 more large salvos of 100 plus missiles into Ukrainian territory. 100 plus missiles, I say, because that's the amount that Russia now knows they require to try to at least overwhelm the Ukrainian air defenses there. And on that topic, it is believed that it will take at least half a decade for Russia to refill its depleted stocks of most of their missiles. And I've said it before, but I think Russia will continue to go hard with missile salvos until one day they realize they just can't go at all. Then in some other news, the Kremlin has signaled that the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, is set to visit the Donbass on an undisclosed date. Probably not this week though, because he just literally crapped his pants yesterday. So I'm willing to bet that there's an entire NATO optical satellite single-handedly devoted to recording live feeds of the Donbass, looking for convoys of armored sedans, black sedans strolling in, likely in the Luhansk city of the Luhansk Oblast, because it's far away enough from the front lines. And as soon as those satellites detect at least a potential Putin whereabouts, I'm sure the coordinates will be relayed right back to Ukraine's longest range offensive missile system capabilities in an attempt to take out Mr. Putin. So the potential may now exist. But either way, if Putin does show up, he'll do a bit of a PR video stunt, and I think it's going to be odd and embarrassing. It always is. There's always something that you can pick out from there that just makes it look and seem so fake. So I'm actually looking forward to all of that. Then in some other news, the US Navy intercepted a fishing boat in the Gulf of Oman, smuggling over 1 million rifle rounds, 7,000 rocket parts, and 2.1 tons of rocket fuel as well, which was en route to Russia. And what can I say? That is some strange looking fish right there. But in all honesty, it's nice to see the high seas getting patrolled for all incomings and outgoings. And it's all Soviet equipment too, which will now instead likely land in the hands of the Ukrainian army instead. So what a twist and turn of events that one will be. But maybe, just maybe, Russia will eventually receive these munitions back anyway, through direct line of sight transfer, if you know what I mean. Then in a Russian mobilization blunder, so another one of these, a video has emerged showing Russian conscripts in Kazan. So this is within Russia, a staging ground for conscripts just about to go to war, and they're performing mutiny as they protest, since they were told they were not allowed to see their relatives or go on leave. Now, the original source of the video came from a Russian social media website, but then it was quickly forcibly deleted, but deleted too late because someone had already saved a copy of it. And you know what? Revolutions have to start somewhere, and that somewhere usually starts when the civilian population is getting constantly treated like garbage. Especially, there's more chance for a movement in our age of global networked communications, in the internet age. then just a bit of a lighter video to round it off with today, guys. So this one is just a Ukrainian of the armed forces doing a bit of a river dance in the mud. It was taken a couple of weeks ago, so I just like to see it as it's quite spirited with high morale just bursting out. And yeah, good stuff. So thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for all your support. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.